One thing I've learned in 20 years of coaching amateur athletes is that peaking is just completely counterintuitive. It's not what you do, it's more about what you don't do. And the secret to peak form in watts?
Stop riding so much during your taper. It's really difficult for a self coach athlete. But if you take your recovery days, trust your taper's design, you're going to be able to feel the form and the watts come to you. What's up, everyone? I'm Coach Frank Overton. Some call me the Big Cat. And in this training tip, I'm going to show you exactly how to achieve a peak, that magical, often elusive form when you're making the best power of your life, having those chainless days where you're ripping the cranks off of the bike. And it's a simple two-step process: applying an overload and then executing a taper. You do these two things in harmony, you can achieve up to a 6% increase in your FTP. But the art is to getting these two to work together in harmony. So let's break it down. Tell me in the comments what you'd like to peak for. It can even be your local group ride, and I'll reply with my advice. But before we dive in, I want to share the inspiration behind this video. First, a big shout out to all the FasCat athletes getting ready for Leadville 100 on August 9th. With guidance from their coach or Coach Cat, they've nailed their progressive overload, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and they've put in 5+ hour simulation rides, and now they're starting their 2-week taper. My advice to everyone: trust the process. You've done the work. All the hay is in the barn. Have confidence in the training you've done. Start preparing mentally and get psyched up because you're going to crush it. And the second inspiration is 20 years ago, I achieved a true physiological peak in the Colorado State Time Trial Championship. I thought my SRM was broken because my watts were so high. And I rode a sub 50-minute 37K time trial at 350 watts. My FTP before the taper was 330, and this was close to a 6% increase. The state TT was my number one goal race I had been training all year for. So I have the process, I have the data, and I've been helping athletes achieve peaks ever since. Because peaking, when done right, is truly one of the greatest feelings in cycling. And I want to share that with you here and now. So let's go over some definitions, and then at the end, I'll walk you through a day-by-day, 2-week taper plan. To begin with, before you peak, you have to taper. And you've got to earn the physiological right to taper with an overload. An overload is the build phase of your training plan. It's when you gradually increase your training volume and intensity over time. You can track it by looking at the level in the CoachCat app. If your level has been steadily rising, that's a clear sign you've been applying a proper overload. At FasCat, most of our plans use what we call a progressive overload. And that just means riding more from week to week for months in a row. A good overload builds slowly. Maybe you start with 4 to 6 hours a week in the winter, and you ramp up to 8 to 12 hours in the spring and early summer. And then you hit some really big weeks, possibly with simulation rides, which are the cherry on top. And these long, hard ride days mimic your race, and they push your level to that all-time high. And they are a great week to put a final wrapping on your progressive overload. If your level has been trending up for 6 to 8 weeks or more, you've built enough training load to support a 2-week taper. But if you've been hovering at the same level for the last few months in a row, a full 2-week taper might actually be too much rest. In that case, I'd recommend just a single recovery week instead. Now that you know what an overload is, let's talk about the second half of the equation, the taper. The taper is where the magic happens, but only if you do it right. Dr. Inigo Mujica, one of the world's leading sports physiologists and gurus on tapers, has spent his career studying tapering, and he found that the right taper doesn't just reduce fatigue, it can improve your power output. Here's what optimal tapering looks like according to Dr. Mujica. Minimize fatigue while improving power output. You maintain your training intensity. You reduce your training volume by 60 to 90%. You keep your training frequency with about a 20% reduction. The taper can last anywhere from 4 to 28 days. It's a progressive, non-linear taper design is what this paper recommends. And you can expect a performance boost of 3% on average, sometimes up to 6%, like in my case. Now, we tailor the length of the taper to the athlete based on their age and the size of the overload they've achieved. I've seen some great overloads built over 6 months that take 2 to 3 weeks to achieve a peak. And conversely, if it's been a shorter overload, 8 to 10 weeks, a shorter taper applies. By and large, a 2-week taper is average, and that works out really well with an athlete's work schedule and life. Masters athletes benefit from longer tapers better, and younger athletes benefit from shorter tapers, which is primarily a function of their ability to recover faster. For example, I used to taper the U23 national team athletes I coached for about 10 days, sometimes as short as 8 to 7. Now, here's the art. 1 to 2 weeks before your A race, you're not going to gain any more fitness. The barn is full. You've made all the hay. There's a temptation to train more because you're so motivated, but you got to resist it. At this point, all the work is done. You're not going to get any faster from training. You're actually going to make yourself slower. So once the taper begins, it's time to let that fitness rise. I'll come back to showing you what a 2-week taper looks like on a training calendar in a second, but first, what do you get when you combine the aforementioned overload and taper? Of course, you get that peak. And a peak is when you're making the best power of the year, you're ripping the cranks off, as we like to say, you're fresh, you're motivated, you're hungry like the wolf, you're mentally locked in, you're attacking climbs, closing gaps, you're digging deeper than you ever have before, and you got the watts in your power data to prove it. And we're talking up, as I mentioned, a 6% increase in FTP. Durability increases too, primarily in the form of peak 3 to 4 to 5 and even 6-hour power vests. Now, athletes can feel a peak coming on 3 to 5 days into the taper, especially in their key workouts. It is common to see some all-time high peak power outputs, and then also to get reports from the athletes that they feel great. That's why during the taper, we're always saying, how you feeling? How you feeling? If they're saying, man, I feel great, coach, and then you look at the data and you're like, dang, that is much higher than we've seen before, you know they are peaking. Okay, what a taper looks like. And this is the key part. We start our tapers with 2 rest days in a row. Remove all acute fatigue. The third day is a short yet full gas interval workout with power demand specific to the A event. Threshold for climbing, anaerobic for punchy, VO2 for all-around demands. Sometimes sweet spot for gravel, and it also could be a short midweek training race if available. We cut the total weekly hours down by 50% from the previous overload week. So if you did 14 hours in your final overload week, expect 7 hours in the first week of your taper and 4 to 6 in the second week of your taper. We include a rest day over the weekend to catch up on life and to do bike errands, that are often necessary for big races. Oftentimes, the first Saturday of the taper week is either a training race or a 1/3 simulation or a hard workout. With regards to a training race, the key is that it doesn't add fatigue. In other words, do not include an epic gravel race with lots of stress the week before your A gravel event. You got to pick and choose better. Now, the second week of a taper has 1 key workout per week, and the rest of the week is either off or short, easy zone 2. The second week is the hardest mentally because oftentimes athletes get bored, they get restless. This is unfamiliar territory. Doubt creeps in with all the unfamiliar time off the bike. And as a coach, the second week of the taper is often a good time to check in with the athlete, to give them a pep talk and a checklist that everything is set, like travel, the bike, and also their mental preparedness. So the hard part is that tapering feels wrong. You feel lazy. You second guess. It's counterintuitive. You'll want to ride more, but don't. The hay is in the barn. The work is done. Trust your taper and let the form rise. So remember, a peak doesn't come from cramming in more workouts before your race. It comes from a well-executed taper after a smart overload. 2 steps, done right, and you'll ride faster than you ever have before. I guarantee it. If you're ready to peak for your goal event, check out our 2-week taper plan in the CoachCat library or build your own with CoachCat. Recovery is a weapon. Use it. And that, my fellow FasCats, is how to peak. If you have any questions about peaking, your taper, or applying an overload, let us know in the comments below. If you're using the CoachCat app, of course, you may ask the AI in the chat, or you may reach out to the coaches in the chat box in the upper right of the app. We're standing by to help you. And with that, you know what to do, and I'm going to mix it up this week specific to your taper. Rest hard, still have fun, and as always, FTF. Peace.